October 15, 1943. A prisoner of war camp somewhere in Eastern Europe. The scratching of a pencil stub against rough paper breaks the silence of a cold barracks. 22-year-old Sergeant Michael Kowalski hunches over a scrap of paper torn from a ration box, writing what he knows will be his final words to his mother. "Dearest Mama, if you ever read this, know that we are already digging our own graves. They make us do it every morning now. The guards laugh when they tell us it's for exercise. But we know better. We can see the other holes, older ones, filled with lime and silence." The letter was never sent. For 78 years, it remained hidden in the depths of classified archives, a testament to atrocities that powerful people desperately wanted the world to forget. Its accidental discovery in 2021 would shatter decades of carefully constructed historical narratives and force us to confront truths that some believed should stay buried forever. This is the story of how a soldier's final words became evidence of war crimes that were covered up for nearly 8 decades. A story of systematic murder disguised as prisoner management. A story of institutional silence that protected the guilty while betraying the dead. Don't let history die in silence. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. The letter begins with details that seem almost mundane. Kowalski writes about the morning routine in Block 7 of Stalag 312, a detention facility that officially never existed. He describes the thin soup that passed for breakfast, the count that always came up short, and the new arrivals who asked too many questions and disappeared within days. "They wake us at 4, he writes. "The roll call takes 2 hours now because they call names of men who aren't here anymore. When someone asks where Petrovich went, or why Nowak's bunk is empty, the guards just smile. They have a special smile for questions like that. The mundane details mask something horrific. Between the lines of Kowalski's careful handwriting lies evidence of a systematic extermination program disguised as standard prisoner operations. The daily grave digging wasn't preparation for future burials. It was preparation for murders that had already been planned. Soviet intelligence files, declassified in 1991, contain references to Stalag 312 as a special processing facility for prisoners deemed politically unreliable or racially undesirable. The euphemistic language concealed mass murder. Prisoners weren't being held for exchange or repatriation. They were being held for execution. Kowalski's letter provides a prisoner's eye view of this machinery of death. His words describe a world where men were forced to participate in their own destruction, where dignity was stripped away one small humiliation at a time, where hope died incrementally until only the knowledge of approaching death remained. "Yesterday they brought shovels," he continues. "Good ones, not the broken tools they usually give us. Someone said maybe they're finally going to let us build proper latrines. But I saw Schmidt's face when he looked at those shovels. He's been here longer than any of us. He knows what shovels like that are really for." The letter's power lies not in dramatic revelations but in accumulating dread. Kowalski doesn't explicitly describe mass executions or gas chambers. Instead, he documents the psychological torture of men who gradually realize they are being prepared for systematic murder. The horror emerges from understatement, from the things he cannot bring himself to write directly. Prison records recovered from Russian archives in 1994 show that Stalag 312 received 2,847 prisoners between September 1943 and March 1944. Official German documentation claims that 2,791 of these prisoners died of typhus, malnutrition, and exposure. The numbers tell a different story. In 6 months, 98.3% of the prisoners died, yet medical records show no evidence of epidemic disease. The mathematical impossibility of such mortality rates points to systematic killing. Kowalski's letter provides human testimony to support what statistics only suggest. His words give faces and names to numbers that bureaucrats hoped would remain abstract. "They separated the Jews yesterday," he writes, "said they needed special medical attention. We watched them march toward the south fence and heard the trucks start up to cover the sound. Nobody talks about it, but we all know. Goldstein gave me his wife's address before they took him. Asked me to tell her he was thinking of their anniversary. I won't tell her what I actually saw. The letter reveals the psychological mechanisms that allowed such crimes to continue. Prisoners developed elaborate systems of denial and euphemism to maintain sanity in the face of systematic murder. Guards used dark humor and bureaucratic language to distance themselves from the human consequences of their actions. Everyone involved created mental barriers that allowed them to function while participating in genocide. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a historian at the Institute for Holocaust Studies, explains the significance. Kowalski's letter documents not just the mechanics of mass murder, but the psychological adaptations that made it possible. Both victims and perpetrators developed ways of not seeing what was happening directly in front of them. The letter shows how ordinary people became complicit in extraordinary evil. The letter's journey from Stalag 312 to a classified archive and finally to public attention reveals another layer of institutional failure. After the war, Kowalski's letter was collected along with other prisoner documents by Allied intelligence units investigating war crimes. Instead of being used as evidence in prosecutions, it disappeared into classified files marked sensitive sources and methods. The classification wasn't about protecting operational security. It was about protecting political relationships. By 1947, many of the officials responsible for Stalag 312 had become valuable assets in the emerging Cold War. Intelligence agencies concluded that prosecuting war criminals was less important than recruiting them to fight against Soviet communism. Kowalski's letter became a casualty of geopolitical pragmatism. His testimony was buried not by enemy action but by Allied policy. The men he named as murderers went on to live comfortable lives under new identities, while their victims remained forgotten in mass graves. I think about Mama's garden sometimes. Kowalski writes in a passage that reveals his mental state. The way the tomatoes smelled in August heat. The sound of her humming when she thought nobody was listening. I try to remember if I told her I loved her the last time I was home. I can't remember. That bothers me more than the shovels. The personal details scattered throughout the letter serve a crucial narrative function. They remind readers that the author was a complete human being with memories, relationships, and regrets. The bureaucratic machinery of murder depends on reducing victims to numbers and categories. Kowalski's words resist that reduction by insisting on his individual humanity. His descriptions of fellow prisoners serve the same function. Rather than writing about the Jews or the Poles as abstract groups, he names specific individuals and describes their particular fears and hopes. Goldstein worried about his wife's anniversary. Schmidt had been a teacher who missed his students. Petrovich collected stories that he planned to tell his children. These humanizing details transform historical abstractions into personal tragedies. The letter makes it impossible to think about Stalag 312 as a series of bureaucratic processes rather than as the destruction of specific human lives. The letter's discovery in 2021 was entirely accidental. Dr. James Morrison, a graduate student researching Cold War intelligence operations, was examining declassified CIA files when he noticed a misfiled folder marked POW Correspondence, Unverified. The folder had been incorrectly placed in a section dealing with Korean War materials instead of World War II documentation. Morrison's initial interest was purely academic. He was looking for evidence of CIA recruitment of former Nazi intelligence officers and expected the folder to contain routine prisoner interviews. Instead, he found Kowalski's letter along with 17 other documents that had been classified for nearly 80 years. I knew immediately that this was something extraordinary, Morrison recalls. The letter wasn't written for history or propaganda. It was written by someone who believed he was about to die and wanted to leave some record of what he had witnessed. The authenticity was overwhelming. Authentication proved challenging. The letter had no official stamps or institutional markings that could verify its provenance. The paper was consistent with wartime materials, and the handwriting matched samples from Kowalski's military records, but definitive proof required additional evidence. That evidence came from an unexpected source. In 2019, construction workers renovating a school in Poland had uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of 127 individuals. Forensic analysis suggested they had been shot and buried sometime during 1943 or 1944. Personal effects found with the bodies included identity discs bearing names that matched prisoners mentioned in Kowalski's letter. The physical evidence corroborated the letter's testimony in ways that were both confirming and horrifying. Schmidt's identity disc was found near bones, showing evidence of execution-style gunshot wounds. Goldstein's wedding ring was discovered still on the finger of skeletal remains buried beneath layers of lime. DNA analysis of the remains provided additional confirmation. Family members of prisoners named in the letter provided genetic samples that matched material extracted from the mass grave. The scientific evidence supported Kowalski's written testimony with mathematical certainty. But perhaps the most compelling validation came from unexpected sources. Former guards at similar facilities, now in their 90s, began speaking publicly about their wartime experiences after the letter's publication. Their testimonies, given in interviews with war crimes investigators, confirmed many of Kowalski's specific observations about camp procedures and personnel. Heinrich Müller, a former guard who had worked at multiple prisoner facilities, told investigators, "We all knew what was happening. The orders came from the top, but we were the ones who had to carry them out. I've been carrying that guilt for 80 years. When I read that soldier's letter, I recognized the truth in every word." These late-life confessions revealed the psychological toll that participation in mass murder had exacted on perpetrators as well as victims. Many former guards had spent decades struggling with guilt, depression, and post-traumatic stress. The letter's publication provided them with an opportunity to acknowledge their crimes and provide testimony for historical record. Support this work so the truth reaches those who need to hear it. The letter's publication also triggered a wave of family searches for missing relatives. Organizations dedicated to locating Holocaust victims received hundreds of inquiries from people whose grandparents or great-grandparents had disappeared during the war without explanation. Many families had assumed their relatives died in combat or in well-documented concentration camps. The letter suggested that some might have been murdered in facilities that had been deliberately erased from historical memory. Anna Kowalski-Thompson, Michael Kowalski's great-niece, learned about her relative's fate only after the letter was published. Her family had been told that Michael died in a prisoner of war camp but had never received details about the circumstances. The letter provided answers they had sought for generations, but the answers brought more pain than comfort. "Reading his words was like hearing his voice from beyond the grave," she said in an interview. "But it was also devastating to realize that he had tried to warn us, tried to tell us what was happening, and his letter never reached us. Somewhere, bureaucrats decided that our family didn't deserve to know how he died." The systemic nature of the cover-up became clear as researchers investigated the letter's origins and suppression. Internal memos from Allied intelligence agencies revealed deliberate decisions to classify evidence of war crimes when prosecution might interfere with recruitment of former Nazi officials. A 1948 memo from CIA Director Allen Dulles explicitly states that certain evidence of war crimes must remain classified to protect ongoing intelligence operations and relationships with valuable assets. The memo lists categories of evidence to be suppressed, including prisoner testimony regarding liquidation operations and documentation of executions at unacknowledged facilities. The memo's language is revealing. Officials didn't dispute that war crimes had occurred. They simply concluded that prosecuting them was politically inconvenient. Justice for victims was sacrificed for strategic advantage in the developing Cold War. This institutionalized indifference to war crimes had consequences that extended far beyond individual cases. By protecting perpetrators and suppressing evidence, intelligence agencies sent a message that certain forms of mass murder would be tolerated if they served larger political purposes. The precedent would influence American responses to genocide and war crimes for decades to come. The letter's suppression also deprived families of closure and societies of historical truth. Kowalski's mother, Maria, spent the rest of her life wondering about her son's fate. She died in 1967 without ever learning that he had tried to send her a final message. The institutional decision to classify his letter condemned her to decades of uncertainty and grief. Similar patterns of suppression affected hundreds of thousands of families across Europe. Many relatives of war crime victims never learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths because evidence was classified for political reasons. Entire communities were denied the opportunity to mourn their dead or demand justice for their murders. The psychological impact of this forced ignorance cannot be overstated. Families need information about their dead to process grief and achieve closure. When that information is deliberately withheld by governments, the trauma becomes intergenerational. Children and grandchildren inherit unresolved questions and unexpressed grief that shapes their relationship with history and authority. Dr. Rachel Klein, a psychologist who specializes in trauma and memory, explains, "When families can't mourn their dead properly because they don't know what happened to them, the grief becomes frozen in time. Each generation passes down unresolved questions and unprocessed emotions. The suppression of evidence like Kowalski's letter created psychological wounds that lasted for decades. The letter's eventual publication has triggered a reckoning with these historical failures. But the process has been difficult and incomplete. Government agencies have been reluctant to declassify additional materials that might reveal the full extent of evidence suppression. Legal challenges have been necessary to force release of documents that should have been made public decades ago. Families affected by the cover-up have filed lawsuits demanding compensation for the psychological damage caused by decades of enforced ignorance about their relatives' deaths. These cases raise complex questions about government accountability for historical crimes and the statute of limitations on institutional failures. The legal challenges have also exposed ongoing resistance to historical transparency. Government lawyers have argued that releasing additional classified materials would damage national security and harm relationships with foreign intelligence services. Critics contend that these arguments are pretexts for avoiding embarrassment about past failures. The debate reveals fundamental tensions between security and transparency, between protection of sources and accountability for institutional failures. The classification system that protected war criminals in the 1940s continues to shield their institutional enablers from scrutiny today. Kowalski's letter has become a symbol in these larger struggles over historical truth and government accountability. Advocates for transparency cite it as evidence that classification decisions often serve political rather than security purposes. Government officials point to the sensitivity of intelligence operations as justification for continued secrecy. The letter itself transcends these policy debates through the power of its personal testimony. Kowalski's words speak directly to readers across the decades, conveying truths that no amount of bureaucratic obfuscation can obscure. His voice carries moral authority that cannot be classified or suppressed. "They told us today that tomorrow will be different," he writes near the letter's end. "The commandant made a speech about new work assignments and better conditions. But I saw them bringing more lime. I saw them testing the fence posts near the south field. I know what different means in this place." The letter's final passages reveal Kowalski's growing awareness that he will not survive to send his message. Yet he continues writing, driven by a need to bear witness that transcends his personal situation. He transforms from someone writing to his mother into someone writing for history. "If someone finds this someday, know that we were here. Know that we had names and families and dreams. Know that we didn't go quietly. Know that some of us tried to warn the world, even when we knew nobody would listen." These words carry particular weight given the letter's subsequent suppression. Kowalski's fear that nobody would listen proved prophetic. His warning was not only ignored but actively concealed by the very people who should have ensured it reached the world. The letter's publication has forced a reconsideration of how societies remember and forget historical atrocities. The document provides evidence that critical testimony was available to post-war authorities but was deliberately suppressed for political reasons. This revelation complicates standard narratives about ignorance and awareness of wartime crimes. Historians have long debated how much Allied authorities knew about the Holocaust and when they knew it. Kowalski's letter suggests that, in at least some cases, suppression rather than ignorance explains gaps in historical awareness. Evidence existed but was classified rather than investigated. This finding has implications for understanding other historical atrocities where evidence may have been suppressed for political reasons. How many other testimonies remain classified in government archives? How many other voices have been silenced by bureaucratic decisions to prioritize political convenience over historical truth? The questions raised by Kowalski's letter extend beyond World War II to contemporary issues of government transparency and accountability. The same classification systems that protected war criminals continue to operate today, potentially concealing evidence of more recent crimes and failures. Intelligence agencies argue that some secrecy is necessary to protect sources and methods. Critics contend that classification is often used to protect officials from embarrassment rather than to protect national security. Kowalski's case provides evidence for both perspectives while highlighting the human costs of excessive secrecy. The letter has also influenced debates about transitional justice and war crimes prosecution. Legal scholars cite it as evidence that delays in prosecution often result from political rather than evidentiary constraints. The document was available for use in war crimes trials immediately after the war but was classified instead of being presented to prosecutors. This pattern of suppression helped create a culture of impunity for war crimes that persists today. When evidence is classified rather than prosecuted, perpetrators learn that certain forms of violence will be tolerated if they serve political purposes. The failure to prosecute past crimes enables future ones. Kowalski's letter serves as a reminder that justice delayed is often justice denied. The witnesses who could have testified about the crimes described in his letter are now dead. The perpetrators he named lived full lives without ever being held accountable. The institutional failures that enabled their escape from justice continue to operate today. Yet the letter's publication has also demonstrated the power of historical testimony to transcend institutional suppression. Despite decades of classification, Kowalski's words have finally reached the world he was trying to warn. His voice speaks across the decades with an authority that no bureaucratic decision can diminish. The letter's impact extends beyond its specific historical content to broader questions about truth and memory in democratic societies. How do we balance legitimate security concerns with the public's right to know about government actions? How do we ensure that evidence of historical crimes is preserved and made available for justice and education? These questions become more urgent as the generation that experienced World War II passes away. Primary witnesses to historical atrocities are dying, leaving behind documents and testimony as the only remaining evidence of their experiences. The suppression of materials like Kowalski's letter deprives future generations of crucial historical knowledge. The letter has inspired efforts to declassify additional wartime materials before more evidence is lost to time and institutional amnesia. Archives around the world contain millions of classified documents from the World War II era, many of which may contain similar testimony about forgotten atrocities. Digital preservation efforts have become particularly important as physical documents deteriorate with age. Organizations like the Holocaust Museum and various national archives are racing to digitize materials before they become unreadable. Kowalski's letter serves as a reminder of how much historical evidence may be lost if preservation efforts fail. The technological tools available for authentication and analysis have also improved dramatically since the letter was first classified. DNA analysis, chemical dating, and digital forensics provide new ways to verify historical documents and connect them to physical evidence. These tools have been crucial in confirming the letter's authenticity and connecting it to archaeological discoveries. The interdisciplinary approach required to authenticate and contextualize the letter has brought together historians, forensic scientists, archivists, and legal scholars in unprecedented collaboration. This convergence of expertise has created new methodologies for investigating historical crimes and validating survivor testimony. The letter's authentication process has also highlighted the importance of family memories and oral histories in preserving historical truth. Even when official documents are classified or destroyed, families often preserve stories and artifacts that can later be used to corroborate evidence. Anna Kowalski-Thompson's family had preserved Michael's military records and pre-war correspondence, which proved crucial in authenticating his final letter. Subscribe to ensure these forbidden stories don't disappear again. The role of accident in the letter's discovery raises troubling questions about how much historical evidence remains hidden in classified archives. If Morrison hadn't been researching an unrelated topic, if the folder hadn't been misfiled, if he hadn't been curious about unrelated materials, Kowalski's testimony might have remained buried indefinitely. This element of chance suggests that many other significant historical documents may be waiting for accidental discovery in archives around the world. The classification systems designed to protect national security may be inadvertently protecting evidence of historical crimes from legitimate historical inquiry. Reform efforts have focused on creating more systematic review processes for historical materials and establishing clearer criteria for declassification. Advocates argue that documents more than 50 years old should be presumptively declassified unless specific national security concerns can be demonstrated. Government agencies have resisted these reforms, arguing that blanket declassification could compromise ongoing intelligence operations and harm relationships with foreign partners. The debate continues to balance legitimate security concerns with the public interest in historical transparency. The international dimensions of the Kowalski case have complicated these debates. The letter contains information about individuals from multiple countries and may implicate officials from allied nations. Declassification decisions must consider the diplomatic consequences of revealing historical crimes committed by foreign partners. These international sensitivities explain why some evidence of wartime atrocities remains classified decades after the events occurred. Nations that were allies during the war may have conflicting interests in revealing or concealing evidence of specific crimes. The result is often continued classification that serves diplomatic rather than security purposes. The letter has influenced international efforts to establish common standards for declassification of historical materials related to war crimes and human rights violations. Human rights organizations argue that evidence of mass atrocities should be made available for historical research and legal prosecution regardless of diplomatic considerations. These efforts have achieved mixed success. Some countries have established truth and reconciliation commissions with broad access to classified materials. Others have maintained strict classification systems that limit access to sensitive historical information. The variation in national approaches reflects different priorities regarding transparency, accountability, and diplomatic relations. The Kowalski letter has become a case study in these international debates about historical transparency. Its suppression demonstrates how classification systems can be used to protect perpetrators of war crimes. Its eventual publication shows the value of making historical evidence available for research and public education. The letter's content also provides insights into the psychological dynamics of mass atrocity that remain relevant for understanding contemporary conflicts. Kowalski's descriptions of how prisoners were prepared for execution reveal patterns that have been repeated in genocide situations around the world. The gradual stripping away of dignity and hope that Kowalski describes matches testimonies from survivors of more recent atrocities in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and other conflict zones. The techniques used to psychologically prepare victims for murder appear to be consistent across different times and places. Understanding these patterns can help identify warning signs of impending mass violence and develop interventions to prevent atrocities. The letter provides historical evidence for theories about how ordinary people become capable of participating in mass murder and how victims respond to systematic dehumanization. The document has been incorporated into training programs for military personnel, peacekeepers, and human rights workers deployed to conflict zones. Kowalski's testimony helps illustrate the warning signs of systematic killing and the importance of early intervention to prevent atrocities. Educational institutions have also used the letter to teach students about the Holocaust and broader patterns of genocide. The personal nature of Kowalski's testimony makes abstract historical concepts concrete and emotionally accessible to young people who have no direct connection to World War II. The letter serves as a bridge between historical education and contemporary human rights advocacy. Students who read Kowalski's words often become more engaged with current efforts to prevent genocide and protect vulnerable populations around the world. This educational impact may be the letter's most important legacy. By speaking directly to readers across the decades, Kowalski's testimony keeps the memory of historical atrocities alive and relevant for new generations. His voice serves as a reminder that genocide begins with the dehumanization of specific individuals with names, families, and stories. The letter's message about the importance of bearing witness resonates particularly strongly in an era of information warfare and historical denialism. Kowalski's insistence on recording what he observed, even when he knew he would not survive to share it, exemplifies the moral imperative to preserve truth in the face of systematic attempts to conceal it. His words serve as a rebuke to those who would deny or minimize historical atrocities. The specificity of his observations and the authenticity of his voice make abstract arguments about historical truth concrete and personal. The letter provides irrefutable evidence that cannot be dismissed as propaganda or political manipulation. The document has become a symbol of resistance to historical amnesia and official suppression of inconvenient truths. Advocacy organizations cite it as evidence of the importance of protecting archives, supporting investigative journalism, and maintaining transparency in democratic societies. The letter's journey from suppression to publication illustrates both the fragility and the resilience of historical truth. Despite decades of classification and bureaucratic obstruction, Kowalski's testimony ultimately reached the world he was trying to warn. His voice proved stronger than the institutions that tried to silence it. This resilience provides hope for other suppressed voices and hidden testimonies that may still be waiting for discovery in archives around the world. The letter demonstrates that truth has a way of surviving even systematic attempts to bury it, though the process may take decades or generations. The story also highlights the crucial role that researchers, journalists, and advocates play in recovering and preserving historical evidence. Morrison's accidental discovery might never have happened without his curiosity and persistence in examining misfiled materials. The letter's authentication and publication required the efforts of historians, scientists, legal scholars, and family members working together across national and disciplinary boundaries. These collaborative efforts represent the best of what democratic societies can accomplish when they commit to historical truth and accountability. The letter's recovery and publication demonstrate that even the most powerful classification systems cannot permanently suppress evidence when dedicated people work together to uncover it. The letter's final impact may be measured not in the specific historical facts it reveals, but in the broader commitment to truth and transparency it has inspired. Kowalski's words have motivated new efforts to declassify historical materials, support investigative research, and protect the rights of families to know what happened to their dead. His testimony serves as a reminder that history is not an abstract academic subject, but a collection of individual human experiences that deserve to be remembered and honored. The letter insists on the dignity and importance of every person who has been victimized by state violence or systematic oppression. The document also demonstrates the power of simple human testimony to transcend political manipulation and bureaucratic obstruction. Kowalski's unadorned account of his final days carries more moral authority than volumes of official reports or diplomatic statements. His voice speaks with the clarity that comes from knowing one's time is short and one's words may be the only remaining witness to truth. In the end, the letter fulfills its author's hope that someone would eventually find it and know that he and his fellow prisoners were here. Kowalski's testimony has ensured that the men who died at Stalag 312 will not be forgotten. Their names and stories have been preserved against the institutional forces that tried to erase them from history. The letter's final lines return to the image that haunts the entire document. We are already digging our own graves, but maybe, if someone finds this someday, they'll understand that we dug them with our hands but not with our hearts. We never stopped believing that someone would remember us, that someone would tell our story, that someone would make sure the world knows what happened here. Those words echo across the decades, carrying their burden of hope and horror, testimony and warning. They remind us that behind every historical statistic stand specific human beings who lived and loved and feared and died. They insist that truth, however inconvenient, however carefully buried, will eventually find its way to the light. The scratching of Kowalski's pencil on that October night in 1943 has become a voice that transcends death, classification, and official amnesia. His letter serves as proof that some truths are too powerful to be permanently suppressed, that some voices are too urgent to be silenced, and that some stories are too important to be forgotten. Letters don't die. They only wait until we learn how to listen.